Okay, good evening, dear hearts, and welcome to another episode of the Inner Dance Show. And supporting us in our return to sacred flow this evening is the phenomenal Falcon Acamesis. Now, Falcon, apart from being an all-out very cool guy, is an out-of-body explorer. And unlike a ghost hunter, he doesn't just perceive spirits. He actually meets and interacts with them in the out-of-body state of consciousness, traveling in his etheric double and astral body. Falcon's also co-founder of Pandora Star, a flickering light device designed to stimulate the brain's natural production of neural for inducing altered states of consciousness as can be experienced with psychedelics such as DMT, sacred mushrooms, and ayahuasca. Now, I've had the pleasure of meeting Falcon. He's recently relocated back to my hometown, and I went to listen to him talk about lucid dreaming. And I'm also now a very proud custodian of a Pandora Star device and have been working with her and the light that loves you, as I like to call it, every day for the last couple of months. So it is a great honor and privilege, Falcon, that you're joining me here for this conversation tonight.
Oh, well, it's lovely to be here, Caroline. Thank you very much.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the sacred work that you do, because I know that you've got your fingers in many pies, and I'm curious about where your main focus is at the moment.
Absolutely. It needs to become more focused because I just love exploring so many things. Really, since I was a boy, from about 6 years old, lucid dreams were, started to happen, and they became, a reoccurring part of my childhood. Same with what you could call out-of-body experiences, but when I was a child, you don't have labels for any of this stuff. I wasn't taught to have lucid dreams at age 6. I didn't initiate out-of-body experiences when I was that age. This stuff just started to happen. And I think, if you were to interview a lot of people, they would say they had experiences they couldn't explain at that age, but now they would certainly apply labels like, out-of-body experiences, lucid dreams. I grew up in the 1970s in the United States. There were no, popular books on the subject. You couldn't go to the library and, just check out, a massive books on the topics. It just wasn't, something that was available to us in mass. And certainly the internet helps people these days, but, we didn't have that back in the 1970s. So I started having these experiences from a very young age. I even had to create my own labels because I otherwise, how do you deal with this, at age 6? I started having these experiences where I knew, as an example, the very first lucid dream, it was a tiger and it was chasing me and my little brother. And I went one way, my little brother went the other way, and the tiger chose to chase my little brother. And it was at that point, there was just something in me that came alive. And it was my awareness within the dream. And I just suddenly realized, wait a second, there's no tiger in tigers, where we live. And, this just doesn't seem right. And I then suddenly realized, well, maybe this is a dream. And everything just changed. And I was able to quickly hunt down the tiger, and it just became a little cat. And it was absolutely amazing. And then when I first started having, what you would label out-of-body experiences, that just confounded things even more. I was having experiences with my family in in what you'd call, the out-of-body state, and they weren't having memories of this stuff. Or, like one experience was just classically stays in my mind. My father was a very angry man, and he was full of rage. And I remember being woken up by him raging in the garden. And I looked out the window and I could see, a form standing in the garden raging. And this was probably about 2:00 in the morning. And I thought, oh gosh, he's going to wake up the whole neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And I went to my mom and dad's bedroom to wake up my mom. And I walked into the room and my mom and dad were sleeping there in the bed. And I was like, what? So obviously the figure that was out in the garden was my father, who was unconsciously out of body. Yes. And I didn't have a label for that either, unconscious out of body experience. This was just very confusing, to the point I had to make up my own labels. And I made up the labels of wakey house and sleepy house. And wakey house was when I maybe 95% knew I was awake. And sleepy house were these experiences that I couldn't really explain, but I knew were happening nonetheless. So I was very confused. And as much as my mom tried to help me understand things, she was thankfully, had a spiritual awareness, and she at least helped me journal. And she gave me that journal when I left home at around age 17. And it was very amazing just to have a mother that, wasn't just, typical, would say something like, oh, it was just a dream, go back to sleep, or something like that. There was much more to it. And I remember even having experiences where I could verify information. And that's what really started freaking people out. My dad in particular, there were two experiences that, really made him think. So yeah, that was kind of the early years for me. And since then, I went on the road hitchhiking when I was in my late teens, early 20s, hitchhiking across the United States, and synchronicity started to show itself to me. And it just seemed that there were unseen forces that were guiding me throughout that road trip. I spent probably 50,000 miles hitchhiking, back and forth, crisscrossing the United States, just with this extreme wanderlust. But I reckon it was much more than that. It was just nowhere felt like where I needed to be. And it wasn't until I was age 23 when I got on a plane and I came to the UK, I finally felt like I can put down some roots. But yeah, those were my early years and my formative years.
Well, I mean, I'm just so struck not only about how sensitive you are and how sensitive you were as a little boy, but to develop a language for yourself to try and make sense of your experiences. What's really interesting, my first lucid dream, I was 3 years old, and it was about a tiger as well.
I love that.
Yeah, but this tiger wasn't chasing me. This tiger rescued me, and she picked me up by the scruff of the neck and dropped me in her litter, and I realized she was going to be my mother.
Oh wow, that sounds beautiful. Almost sounds like maybe a power animal or spirit animal, spirit guide.
Yeah, but it was a real awakening. I remember the next morning, I mean, not having the words to be able to tell anybody, but realizing that my dreams were so important and never to forget a dream, that I had to really stay conscious to them and be awake as much as I could in them going forward. So tell me more about your hitchhiking. It's not something so many of us do nowadays. And do you feel that you were guided towards hitchhiking? Is that some messages that you received through your dreaming and your astral traveling, or?
So, like a lot of us, we use convenient labels like coincidence instead of meaningful coincidence, which is synchronicity. We might use the same word coincidence when we have a precognitive dream that comes true the next day. So we have those labels of convenience. And when I was hitchhiking, I didn't know the word synchronicity, but synchronicities happened. Literally, they became an everyday experience, and without a shadow of a doubt, some of those experiences were just what you would call supernatural in nature and almost impossible. The odds of some of the things happening. And it really made me think. I was 19 when I first started hitchhiking, and then I stopped for a little while. And then I picked it up again when I was 21 and kept going until I was 23. And yeah, I would say I was certainly being guided. There's no doubt in my mind. And there were a few really big synchronicities where you just can't escape what's happening. You can only doubt for so long. And for me, even something like doubt, it's a growth test. Because it will only slow you down if you continue to deny what is taking place, whether you can explain it or not. I know with science, science just doesn't have there's not enough interest because, the grant money is not going to go in mass to individuals that are doing research on the paranormal. It's just not where the money goes. And so there's not a big body of research out there for this stuff. So it's really left to us as individuals. So yeah, when I was hitchhiking, I kept a journal, kept a diary on a regular basis of what was happening. And some of those experiences are things that, I share in my workshops these days. I share in my talks because they're so profound. Like, for example, there was one experience where I remember I was hitchhiking from Florida to Alaska for the first time. And I'd chosen the wrong time of the year. It was pretty much the winter time. But when I left Florida, there was no problem. Florida, we pretty much have maybe 2 seasons at best. So here's this Florida boy. I was at that time, I think when I did that trip, I was 19. And, I just had a couple bags and I hit the road, put my thumb up, got a lift. And I was just wearing like shorts, t-shirt, had a jacket with me, had tennis shoes, like trainers. So nothing great. And I never wore socks because, Florida was always hot. So minimalism on the clothing. And I remember getting to the state of Michigan, and, the state of Michigan borders with Canada. And I thought this was going to be my entry point on this occasion. So here I am on the side of the road, and it was now getting really cold. And I was there still standing in shorts. I had my jacket on, and I had these tennis shoes and no socks. And I'm standing there on the side of the road, and I remember having my thumb up, and it was just so brutally cold. And I had to keep putting my thumb under one of my armpits and then put the other arm out with that thumb. And I had to just keep switching. And I thought to myself, I could really do with a pair of gloves. I mean, this is crazy. And the very next person that picked me up, he picked me up and we're driving for a little while, and he asked me a little bit about my story, and I was just sharing the immediate stuff. Well, here I am trying to get to Alaska, didn't, even have a thought about how cold it was going to be. And, standing there, my thumb was freezing. And I just told him that little tidbit. And he literally just reached over, popped the glove box while he was driving. It fell open. The door fell open, and there's this pair of gloves. He's like, "Hey man, take those gloves. You obviously need them more than I do." And I was like, "Wow, that's really great." I didn't think much at that moment. That could have been what you can call coincidence, or just just a kindness. I guess a lot of people up that way probably have winter gear in their car, so I didn't think much of it. He then dropped me off. I was still maybe a good, 50, 60 miles from the border, but he was only going that far, so he dropped me off. We said our goodbyes. And here I am now with these gloves, and I was like, wow, this is great. This is fantastic. My hands are warm, and I can put my thumb out, no problem. And so I got my thumb out, and there maybe 10 minutes, and the cold's coming back. And now I'm thinking to myself, wow, my ears are really cold. Oh, wow, how am I so unprepared? So I'm now thinking about, wow, I need a hat. I was starting to visualize the perfect hat, and I wasn't doing manifestation. I didn't know what that was, to be honest. And I was just visualizing one of these Russian hats, the ones with the earmuffs that fold down. And I was just visualizing that. I was smiling. Wow, I wish I really had something like that. And this next guy picks me up. I'm in the car, and we're talking, and I'm sharing this story about my hands being cold, my thumbs. And the next guy that picked me up, he had these gloves he gave me, and I told him, yeah. And then it got to this point, though, when he dropped me off, and my hands were nice and warm, but now my ears were freezing. And I was telling him about this hat I was, daydreaming of. And he just started to laugh. And he literally, as he's driving, he grabs this object from the back seat, and he throws it in my lap. And it's one of these Russian hats. The exact thing I was visualizing. I was like, what? And I just couldn't believe what just happened. So at that point, I was thinking, this is just crazy. What's the coincidence? What's the odds of, 2 things I needed most being provided by the 2 drivers that picked me up last? And, it was just, the odds of it was blowing my mind. So he maybe took me another 10 miles or so, dropped me off, still had a little bit of distance to go. And I remember the next guy that picked me up, again, here we are driving, I'm telling these stories, and, nothing much happened there. He dropped me off, but he gave me some good advice. He was like, look, there's a youth hostel, right before the border. I'd probably use that as your base before you go in the next day, get a good night's sleep. And so I thanked him for that information. And I'm standing there on the side of the road. I probably needed a good one more lift to get to where I needed to be, to that youth hostel. And I'm standing there on the side of the road with my hat. My ears are nice and warm. My thumbs and hands are warm. Everything's going well. And then I realized, wait a second, there's now snow starting to come down. And the jacket I had was okay, but it probably wasn't sufficient for, full on blizzard weather. But anyway, it was okay at the moment. So the snow's starting to come down. And I look down, and here I am in shorts still with my tennis shoes and no socks. And the cold from the road, from standing on the side of the road, was just going right up through the soles of the shoes, right into my feet. And it was very jarring. I mean, that was really, really cold on my feet. And I thought, wow, what am I going to do about this? And so the next guy picks me up, and he dropped me off practically right on the doorstep of the youth hostel, which was amazing. And we said our goodbyes. I went inside the youth hostel, and I really had to think about it because I didn't have much money with me. I think I had something like less than $20. And I went in the youth hostel. It was $10 for the night. So I paid the $10, and I thought, there's no way I'm sleeping rough. There's no way. So I paid the $10. And I was sitting there going through my gear at one of the tables during dinner and just eating a sandwich or something. And the youth hostel manager came over. And he looked down at me. We struck up a conversation. I was telling him where I was going. And looked down at my feet. He goes, "Are you going through Canada with those shoes?" And I was like, "That's all I've got. And I really don't have money to buy anything else." And he just looked at me like, I was an alien. And like, what are you doing? And he goes, "Just wait here." And he went off. He went to his office, and he came back with these brand new pair of boots. And he said, "I don't know if these are your size, but somebody must have left these, when they were coming through. And I don't know if they forgot them, but nobody's come back to claim them. But if they're your size, if they fit, you can have them." I put them on. They were exactly my size. I could not believe it. So here I was being taken care of. There was no doubt in my mind that it was being looked after. It was just too coincidental for me to use that label. So I just started to refer to it as these unseen forces that not just seemed to be guiding me, but looking after me.
Yeah.
Almost everything that I needed was being taken care of. And even to the point to where I had, in just a few short months, I developed such a great confidence that everything would be taken care of, including money. I could go, a couple 100 miles hitchhiking with maybe a few dollars in my pocket, but every single thing was taken care of. It wasn't somebody who picked me up and they're like, "Look, I'm just about to hit the road for, a good 50 miles. I'm just going to pop into the drive-thru at McDonald's. Would you like anything? My treat." And it would just be there on the table. Everything was taken care of. Or somebody would be like, it's getting late at night. Somebody picks me up and they're like, "Look, you're obviously not going to get very far at this point. Would you like to sleep on the sofa for the night?" Every single thing every need was being met. It was crazy.
Wow.
So, I definitely developed this awareness, and I'd already had, I think, a spiritual awareness from those years where I had the lucid dreams, the out-of-body experiences. I was always this kid at school that, I was very much a loner. I was very awkward. I got mentally bullied. I didn't get physical bullied very much. It was more mental bullying because I was just so odd and different. I would choose, instead of, at break time to be with the other kids, I'd go down into the playground and sit, as far away from everybody as I could, just staring up into the sky. People thought I was a true space cadet. So things were very awkward for me, but that was because my mind was fixed on, the non-ordinary reality because of all these experiences. How can you have lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences and the validation that came with that sometimes and not have your mind sort of pulled between two worlds?
Absolutely. So I'm imagining that it's taken time to develop that capacity to be a walker of both worlds, to one foot in each world. Is that what it feels like for you?
Yeah, it's 100% like that, 100% like that. And I think it's a balancing act because this world really requires presence. Yes. It requires great presence to succeed in this world. And I feel, things like, for manifestation as an example, to truly, have the things that you need to not just survive in this world, but to thrive in this world. It's things such as, a a focused thought, having the ability to focus your thoughts for a sustained period of time, being able to raise your energy levels, because when you're trying to manifest from a negative energy point, let's say, let's just equate this to something, let's parallel this to the analogy of a bank account. If your emotional bank account, if you're in the black, you've got thousands in the bank, and then a bill comes through, it's not going to hit you so emotionally because you got the money in the bank to back it up and you can pay that unexpected bill. But let's say you're near overdraft, you're couple $100 living from paycheck to paycheck, and you get an unexpected bill. Maybe your car breaks down, it's going to cost you thousands. Emotionally, mentally, that is going to hurt a lot. Physically, it's going to hurt a lot. And let's say you're already in overdraft and a big unexpected bill comes. Here you are, if you're trying to even inadvertently make things happen, even if it's through brute force will, versus more classic manifestation, which is knowing that, you're co-creating with forces beyond this world. When you know that, even if you're in a low energy state, it's not easy. Things don't seem to just manifest so easily. We might have, have intentions that are emotionally charged in a negative way, and this can work against us. So, for me, it was to help create that balancing act between these worlds, realizing that I need to be present in my life. I can't just lie on the sofa all day long and have these experiences. Who's going to look after me? Who's going to take care of me? I'm not a guru in an ashram in India where the local community takes care of all my needs. I actually need to have some level of normality. And I think this is one area that I find a lot of people struggle with. They come to my workshops and people inadvertently, somebody will raise this as a question. They'll say, it seems that as I grow more and more into my true self, the more people start to fall away from me, the more struggle I have with, everyday life and with, people in my life. And, you will hear things like, we might go to a workshop, we might go to a seminar, we come back, with all this great new information, and then we overshare it, because we're excited, but we overshare it with people who maybe don't share our experiences. They have different experiences from us. It's not to say they're not on their own spiritual journey, even if they believe in spirituality or not. They're still on a spiritual journey, but it's different from ours. Maybe theirs are more related to the material world. So we come back from these workshops, we start to overshare because we're excited. We want people to share in, the knowledge and the wisdom that we're learning and we're gaining experience of. And then they say things like, you've changed. We've all probably heard that, and they say it, and it's not so much in a nice way that they say it, you've changed. They're saying you've changed in their eyes for the worse. You're starting to grow in ways. And I think ultimately what they're really saying is, because we're all hardwired for connection, what they're ultimately saying in my eyes, what they're saying is they're feeling rejected, because maybe they want to grow with you. And this is one of our core human needs, whether it's on our own or with other people, is growing. And then at some point we've grown so much, we can then start to make a contribution. So they see us start to grow in areas where they feel maybe they don't have the interest that we have in that area. So they can't grow with us. And so they're starting to feel some level of rejection because we're now going to events on a regular basis. We have other people who understand us and that we can have conversations with. And that connection, to this new world is now starting to meet needs such as our need for growth, our need for contribution, our need for, something like significance. So because maybe our whole lives, certainly I felt my whole life, I felt so marginalized. I felt like I had to constantly censor what was really on my mind because my peers weren't thinking of the things that I was thinking about. So I had to constantly be on my guard. And now I'm opening myself into a world where there's other spiritual people who feel the same. We can go to a dinner and go to a restaurant, and the whole table is explosive with people just for a lifetime who've been, sort of bottling it up. And here we are now all exploding all over the place because we have all these great stuff to share with like minds, kindred spirits. So, those who we've grown up with, our families, our friends, they're starting to feel like I said, their own form of rejection. And that's what they really mean when they say that. They're just not being vulnerable enough. But that's the story of our world. We don't have enough vulnerability because at this moment in time, the primary thought system is one based in fear. And we would look at something like vulnerability as a weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking from someone who also lives in fear a lot of the time, I was really struck actually by something you said earlier, that you said that doubt is a growth test. And I'd never actually heard it put like that before.
Well, think about this. So you have a doubt. Let's say you have a doubt in an area where, this is classic for me. Whenever I run a new event, whether it's an evening talk, maybe a couple hours, or maybe a 9-day workshop, I over prepare because I guess, I still have some wounds. And one of those wounds might be around something like imposter syndrome. Who am I to teach something like this? Who the fuck am I not to teach something like this? I've been having these experiences since I was 5 and 6 years old, but the wounding is because people wouldn't listen, when I was that age. The only person who would listen was my mother. And she only had so much bandwidth, to be honest, because she had 3 other boys and she had a husband, and she was the one that worked from home and she looked after us. So she only had so much bandwidth to listen to this stuff, So my wound was I wasn't being heard, I wasn't being understood. It wasn't that I don't qualify for being able to speak on these topics, because these topics came natural to me, and I would imagine most of your listeners probably for them too. So I over prepare, a lot of the times. And then when I get to my events, I might have all my note cards in my hand, but I only wind up using one because I've studied so hard and I've learned so much and I've written down so much and I've just gone through so much and I've remembered experiences, maybe read through my journals to, as part of the preparation. So I'm doubting myself the whole way through though. I'm doubting myself, have I prepared enough? Something like that. And this is why it's really important to see it as a test and then look back. A lot of people are looking forward, only looking forward. And when they look back, they're looking back with the rose-tinted glasses that are been created in fear. We look back and we obsess about situations from the past. We give a lot of energy to things where, where we were hurt in the past and wounded. And so for me, when I look back, I'm looking back to see how far I've come. I've looked back to see, how much I've grown. I'm looking back when I get doubt and I know it's a growth test. For me, everything is a growth test on an absolute level. On a physical level, we may not always see it that way. We may not see the interconnectedness of everything. But on an absolute level, on a non-physical level beyond this world, you could perceive everything as a growth test. Not a test to see if you're going to fail, but a test to see if you're ready to show you, like I said, how far you come, how much you've grown, to see if you're learning to say no when others expect you to say yes, to have integrity around saying yes and no. How much have you grown in these areas where you've been wounded? So for me, the doubt is an important sign that, I'm being tested. And it's for me to be able to look back, to see the tools that I've developed. Okay, what do I need in this moment to reassure myself? What do I need in this moment to reassure myself that I am ready for this, to give in this talk, this lecture, that I am qualified to do this, So those doubts can then be worked through. But that's everybody's story. That's for all of us. It's just getting to that level of self-awareness and developing a very keen self-awareness when we get these triggers.
Yeah, beautiful. And I guess what I'm hearing through your life's journey is that as you become more and more aware of the interconnectedness of all things and the synchronicities that rise up to meet you, that you develop a relationship of trust with belonging, being part of this universe, and trusting that you have those guides and that you're being looked after and that you're co-creating as you go.
Yes. And I think, you've really nailed something which is a big one for all of us, and that's self-trust. We have so much doubt.
Mm.
one of the biggest wounds for all of us, as we are from childhood, we experience situations that, for me, as an example, my father was very abusive. He'd wake us up if we hadn't taken out the rubbish, the trash, before going to bed. When he'd get home from work, he'd have a couple beers, smoke a little bit. By that time, he's not in the best state of mind. He's in a negative energy state. And he realizes the rubbish has not been taken out. So he'll wake all four of us up 1 o'clock in the morning before he goes to bed to have us go out and do it. He'll shout at us, yell at us, maybe even beat us. And so I learned very quickly, like a lot of kids do, to survive, I have to wear various masks. I have to wear a mask. I have to learn to lie in order to survive in some cases. So, we have all this stuff going on, and we learn, about, like I said, the trust gets damaged. Trust between our guardians. People are supposed to be looking after us, but instead are abusing us. Even if we go to church like I did as a child, it wasn't my choice to go to church. But every Sunday, our parents would get us dressed for church. The church bus would come pick us up. My parents usually would stay at home. Probably just for them, it was a ritual of being able to have some space on the weekend away from four very energetic boys. And we'd go to church, and the first thing we'd do, we'd go to Sunday school. And in Sunday school, we're learning about this guy named Jesus. We're learning about, the apostles. We're learning about, all these acts of kindness, all these acts of faith. And then we were collected and we were sent on to big church, where, now you have the whole congregation filled with adults and us children. And there was usually this one man standing up at the front, raging, talking about how, if we do this, we go to hell. If we do that, we go to hell. And the whole story was, the whole narrative was just abusive. And it's what I would call religious abuse. So, of course, we have all these trust issues going on. And then we start to grow through the ranks more. We get to our teen years, and we still haven't had any rites of passage yet. There's no rites of passage going on for us whatsoever, from boyhood to manhood. And so we're missing out on all that. And then we start to see that maybe some of our teachers have let us down in certain ways. Maybe we're seeing the favoritism between the star pupil and the lack of enthusiasm that we get. So we see the unfairness there. We maybe get into our early 20s and we start to have other cracks start to form in our worldview. Maybe something like 9/11 happens, and you're just saying to yourself, this just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right that there's these drills going on, these defense drills going on, military drills going on the same day, related to aircraft being hijacked and flown into buildings. And on that same day, that's exactly what's happening. And then you see something like that, or you see Building 7, which was, came down in exact free fall without even being hit by a plane, hours after the other buildings came down. And you're just like, this doesn't seem right. It doesn't, what my eyes are seeing, what my ears are hearing is not matching up to the narrative that is being, crafted by the two dominant systems, of the church and government, and so we start to lose trust in institutions that we're supposed to trust. And in some cases, trust not just with our physical lives, but our spiritual health. And this has a huge toll on us. So of course we get to adulthood with all these wounds around trust, self-trust in particular, because at some point, fair enough, when we're children, we're really young children, we are completely at the mercy of adults in most cases. Like when we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, you could say you starting to, from experience, you start to develop, enough defenses. Again, these are all these masks that we're forced to develop as children to survive childhood. I'm Generation X. We truly were, as the meme suggests, we were truly feral. We did drink from, garden hoses, when we were out, and we might have got a sandwich from somebody if somebody's mom and dad were home. That was our reality. And so we had to fend for ourselves. We had to learn to have, trust in something, in some cases, bigger beyond us, beyond our parents, because they weren't always there for us at that, time in the 1970s and the early 80s. Yeah. But trust was damaged, and there was a lot of dishonesty that we had to in ourselves engage in to survive. So yeah, here we are as adults, and one of our biggest wounds is around self-trust. And it's, for a lot of us, it's having the vulnerability to realize that. It's having the vulnerability to say, okay, another thing, I can't do this on my own, and having this spiritual awareness that you're not supposed to do this on your own. This healing work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how passionately you speak about everything, Falcon. I'm really very moved by everything that you're naming, and speaking with such clarity and truth. I can hear the sound of that frequency.
Thank you.
I'm reminded, for someone who lost trust very early on, the place where I could trust was always in my dreaming, in the dream dimension. There was something about, it was a place where I would look forward to going, still do. I love going to dream, and it's a space where I feel probably more at ease than I do in the waking day. I'm curious what it's like for you when you dream and journey.
Well, this is one of my biggest passions to speak on. You've now crossed into a territory which is, from very early years. And then as a 30-something, in my mid-30s, I started to rekindle that passion. Throughout my 20s, my early 30s, I had a really powerful conspiracy mind. I was a prepper, so I had things buried under my floorboards in every house that I lived in. I had food and water and medical supplies for like 1 and 2 years. If society broke down in any way, I was prepared. I was a bit of a bushcrafter, so I could look after myself and I could look after my family. But all of this, I was still tapping into those unseen forces. I still knew I was being guided. I still knew, synchronicity. I now knew what synchronicity was. I could label it, and when I saw it, I could say, yeah, that's a synchronicity. And I could see it could be an everyday experience if I kept my energy on a higher level. I could see almost transparently the interconnectedness of one area of my life to another area of my life. So say, for example, my nighttime, my nocturnal activities, like you're pointing out, this is, for me, this is sacred sleep and dreaming.
Yes.
The workshop that the evening talk that you attended, where we first met, that whole night I was initiating people in my own way.
Yeah.
I was asking them to look at their waking lives. And if their waking lives was a mess, what did they expect to get from any of the things that I could teach them on how to become lucid in a dream? What do you think if somebody's everyday life is a mess? Everybody's everyday, their 96% of their unconscious behavior is being driven by low quality thoughts and feelings, which is a lot of people. How do you think that's going to play out if they become lucid in a dream? Whereas maybe moments before they're unconscious and they're being chased by a shadow figure. And then maybe something I said during the talk triggers in that moment, and they do a reality test. They maybe, in that moment try to fly. And then sure enough, they're not flying, but they're flapping their arms like a bird, frantically to get away from the shadow figure. And suddenly they realize they're 10 meters off the ground. And they're like, okay, maybe this is a dream. What are they going to do next? What are they going to do? That shadow figure is still there. And now they have to confront it. What do you think is going to happen? Now I know what's going to happen in most cases. A lot of people are going to wake up very quickly from that experience because they're like, I'm not prepared for this. They wanted it. They wanted it, desperately. But what happens to the desperate gambler? It's all fear-based, and it's all going to go wrong in most cases because we're operating from a level of fear that's going to trigger our fear mind. And that shadow figure may be nothing more than their own astral form, which is operating independently in that moment, but is still interconnected to them. And it could be as simple as that. Literally, that shadow figure could have been their own astral form.
Yes.
And they were operating within a dream field at that moment, within the etheric body, and the astral form was just there doing what it does. So for me, it's learning the interconnectedness of all things. So if I want to become a really amazing dreamer, then I have to understand, and not just a dreamer, where I'm keeping a journal, religiously start to keep a journal, because this is one of the amazing techniques that are taught to people. Let's say you have very little dream recall. You have fragments, just, very small clippets of dreams when you wake up that you remember. Once you start keeping record, even if it's just say, okay, I remembered only flashes of a dream, I can't even really put together a coherent statement on it. But if you just write that down, and then you write something like, but tomorrow is going to be a different story. Tomorrow, I'm going to remember more, because tonight I'm going to fall asleep with a greater awareness. Tonight, I'm going to go to sleep with love in my heart, and I'm going to surrender my fear mind to my heart. And I'm going to go into sleep with this heart-centered consciousness, and let that be your last thought, your last feeling before you fall unconscious into the dream field. You are going to have, a completely different experience of dreaming. You're going to wake up and you're going to have more memory the next day, because you are also saying, you're making a very powerful statement to the unconscious. You're saying, I'm now going to pay attention. Where in the past, I was unconscious to this. It wasn't important to me. It was insignificant. Now it is significant. Now I value this opportunity. Now I value this experience. And I understand how much the information that comes through while I sleep can have really big implications on my everyday life. It could be downloads. It could be guidance. It could be a life review. It could be something that makes my physical existence better. If I get lucid in a dream and I'm able to have an experience that, is maybe only 20 minutes on the sleeping, on the sleeping clock, being asleep, but in that reality, beyond physical reality, where we experience linear time, when you're in these non-physical realities, these dimensions that are adjacent to our physical reality, they don't operate, in the same time zone. If I could say it that way, it's a different type of time zone. Time just doesn't operate that it does here. You could literally be in a dream. You could be in your astral body dreaming and become aware that you're dreaming. You're now lucid in a dream in your astral body, not even aware that you're on the astral planes, that your astral body has parked itself, like a zombie in an astral city, and you're completely oblivious to it because you've got the dreaming mind in full force around you. You're in this dream bubble. And the astral citizens are walking around you kind of just giggling, because they can see that, oh, here's one of those fizzers, one of these people from physical reality that don't know that they're out of their bodies while they're sleeping, because that's the everyday reality for people on those higher dimensions. They're used to us being sleepwalking in their dimensions while we sleep. That's why I call them astral dreams and not just dreams, because we're typically in our etheric or astral bodies when these things are happening. So yeah, this is a huge part of my life, as you can tell. I mean, I've gone deep with all of this stuff. I've got, over 1,000 conscious journeys to these other dimensions, where we would call them the afterlife, where we'd call the interlife state, where we'd call them the pre-life state, because we have this essence inside of us. And I have no doubt of this now. Even a lot of the spiritual people, they might know this stuff, but where did they get knowledge of this stuff? Was it from a book? Was it from a talk? What was it? Because there's a difference between believing something and knowing something through direct experience. That's why I love running my synchronicity walks, which maybe we'll tap into as well. But I'm passionate about this stuff because this stuff is so real for me, and I can see the struggles of everyday people, even to the point where when I see how hard it is in the world. And my life now, it seems to be a place of privilege, because I've applied everything that that we're talking about and way more in my everyday life. So I've gotten to a point where my life is stable, where, I have money in the bank. I'm not just, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. But I have to remind myself to stay connected to life, to everyday reality, because if I'm in an ivory tower, I'm disconnected from everyday people. I'm disconnected from everyday struggles. And if I don't understand how everybody in the world is feeling, if it's uneasy in the world, why should it be uneasy for me? I don't mean, I should have all my money taken away. I should experience, poverty again. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I need to be able to be in the world, even though, I have been able to succeed on this level because I've applied energy principles, because I understand energy in ways I didn't when I was a child or when I was a teenager. I understand them now, and that's applied spirituality. Non-applied spirituality is when we know things, but we don't put them into action. So for me, it's about teaching people, especially through my enthusiastic ways, is to apply what they learn. Because as I said on that night when you came, to my talk for the first time, that 96% of the people in that room were going to go home and they were not going to apply what they learned, even with the best of intentions, because they have so much programming working against them. So yes, one of the first stages of learning the dream, the sacred dreaming, is to communicate to the unconscious, I am prepared to show up now. I am prepared to show up by keeping this journal. I may not be able to write very much right now, but I can show you my enthusiasm. I can show you how much I know that my dreams are important to me, and that the more that I create, the more I manifest in my own life, the more abundance I create of all these, of all this spiritual wealth, the more I have to give. Because if I'm struggling, yes, I can still give things. I can give a smile to people. I can give up my seat on the train. I can give what I have. But when I get to a level of abundance to where I have so much more to give, and I don't have to even think about it. I don't have to think, wait a second, if I give away my last $100, my last 100 pounds, how much that's going to hurt. Or by me doing the spiritual work around wounds that make me think, oh, I can't teach, for money. How can I teach spiritual ideas and charge people for it? That itself is a wound, a very old wound, that all of us face, because this is not our first life. We've probably been in the past, in past lives, where we've had lives where we've used our spiritual gifts and we've got paid, and then things went wrong, not because there's a spiritual law that says we shouldn't do that, but because we have this wound that we didn't work on before we started doing this stuff, or, we didn't intend to, heal this stuff because we didn't even know it was there. This stuff, we can go on and on. That's why sometimes I have to have 9 days, of a workshop with people, a residential workshop, because there's so much to communicate, and you don't want to communicate out of context, because as the expression goes, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. And I know there's probably already in the body of this conversation, this last, thread, there's probably 2 or 3 things that I've left untied. I haven't tied up because, I've been just going everywhere, but I realized that we've only got so much time in the body of this conversation. There's just so much to cover. And yeah, I do, I do get a bit excited. Because it's exciting. Why would you not want to be excited on this stuff? What's the point of showing up somewhere if you're not going to allow it to affect you?
Absolutely. And I think your excitement's really part of the medicine, Falcon. You've touched on it earlier that we're sleepwalking. We're sleepwalking through our days and through our lives, and we have the capacity to wake ourselves up in our sacred sleeping. And so it's really important that we can listen to people who do this consciously, who are passionate and who are full of life, because that's what wakes us up. It stirs and animates something inside of us and piques our curiosity. So I'm so grateful for your passion and how you can really invite people to practice applied conscious spirituality.
I think it's part of being, for me, a sign of spiritual adulthood is getting to the point of, the generosity. It's like a creative generosity. Like I said earlier, you may not have the ability to give financially. You may not have the ability to give only so much bandwidth in certain areas of your life. This is, for me, where we then get to a point of understanding we can be creative with our generosity. There are so many ways that we can give back. There are so many ways that we can ignite that powerful spiritual paradox of, giving to receive, because what we give is what we receive. And this is such an important thing for people to understand. I remember once, I'm in my 50s now, and I had, before we moved to Scotland a year and a half ago, we lived in Norfolk in England, and we lived on a farm which had 3 acres, and it was just a beautiful place to be. And I remember my 22-year-old son came up with a couple of his pals, and we were in one of the outbuildings, one of the barns, and we were talking about some of this stuff because, my son and his friends are at that point where they need to have some mentoring. They need to have stuff modeled to them that is going to, help them, and then help them help others. Yes. Be an inspiration, be a light to others. So I remember on one occasion, we're there in the barn, we're talking, and we started speaking on the topic of manifestation. And my son was talking about how, he feels so much stress. Like when he goes out to a meal with his friends, he's got a little bit more money than they do. And it stresses him out because they even know that he's got more money than him. So he feels very awkward, and he's had to create a boundary, and he pays for his stuff. And I said, son, that I think is important to create boundaries. There's no doubt about that. And I said, even when you have money, there is still a responsibility that you have, in using that money in ways that are the right ways of using it. But I said, no matter what, though, I said, maybe this will help in some ways. I said, I want you to hold both your hands out, okay, in front of you, like you're, like it's like a bowl. And I said, I now want you to imagine like all the wealth of the universe is just like you pulled this lever, and all this wealth is pouring through. It's diamonds, it's gold, it's rubies, gold coin, silver coin, and all this is filling your hands. What's your instincts? And he did exactly what I thought he'd do. He clenched his hands, he closed them. And I said, keep your hands there under the stream of that wealth that's still now falling upon your closed hands. You've got some and you're clinging on to it, but everything else is now falling to the wayside. You keep your energy open. You keep your energy open. A lot of people will, say, oh, but you have to keep yourself closed down. You have to keep your chakras closed up and all this stuff. I think when you're operating from a level of fear, absolutely, it pays dividends to operate from a certain level of having your energy field, battened down. But when you get to a level, can you imagine like the story, like I said, about Jesus, when we first started talking, when I went to Sunday school and I was learning about, this individual where he would sit there, he would go to the market and he would seek out the leper community and he would do healing work, with these lepers. Now I can't imagine Jesus waking up that morning, whether he's a fictional man or not, doesn't matter. What matters to me is the metaphors, the stories. They're inspirational to me. They're modeling something to me. I can't imagine Jesus waking up in the morning and thinking, oh shit, I'm going to be with the lepers today. Oh my God. All the negativity, already putting his energy before him, but in a really negative way. He's already having conversations in his head with people that aren't even in the room. He's like, oh shit, okay, where's that crystal I charged for the last week? Let me put that in my pocket over here. Let me get some sage and, really, fill my energy field with, lots of, clear my energy field. Yes, protect yourself, but protect yourself in loving ways. We don't go into the world searching for people's guilt. When we operate from a certain level of conscious awareness and self-awareness, we look for people's, we look for their innocence. We don't just look for their guilt. We're so programmed to see the negative first in most areas of life because all the authority figures, all the institutions are literally feeding us fear porn. And we're sorry, there's a lot of background noise going on now. We've got 2 children and I think it's bedtime. And so there's a lot of protesting going on from the young ones. So I think it's this kind of stuff that once again you need to look at. It's like when you want to create spiritual wealth, this wealth of all good things, it's understanding these energy principles and mechanics. What is manifestation class 101? Whether we think something good or bad, whether we we believe this, if we argue our limitations, sure enough, they're ours. If we focus on the negative, we're going to see the negative. The mirror, the universe truly is, the world truly is a mirror. Yes. And everything is being constantly reflected back to us. And all of these reflections are literally reflections of what's inside us. This is why I love the Hawaiian spiritual practice of the Ho'oponopono, because it's teaching us that everything is connected. And the adult in the room, literally in the case of one of the chief teachers of that tradition, Dr. Hugh Lin, he was a Western psychologist, trained as a Western psychologist, but he was a Hawaiian by birth, and indigenous. That's his culture, and he learned this Ho'oponopono practice. And this Hawaiian State mental institution hospital got in touch with him and said, "Look, nothing we're doing traditional Western psychology is helping. It's just making things seem to be getting worse." And he came in and he said, "Okay, look, I will work with you." But they were coming to him partly because they knew of this non-traditional practice, this spiritual practice that he had become a master of. So they invited him to work with the hospital. He said, "Okay, I will work with you, but I will not work directly with patients. I will not have a clinic with patients. I will not even work on the ward. I won't have an office on the ward. I'll have an office in the hospital somewhere, but off ward. You'll just bring me the files for each client, and I will do my work with each client in this way." And what he was doing was, before he even came in that day, like I was saying with Jesus, Jesus isn't going to sit there and worry about the day ahead. Jesus is going to prepare himself for the day ahead. Jesus is going to, when he goes in to take a shower, he's going to maybe call upon the elements. I call forth the sacred elements of water. I ask for your divine powers to wash through me and cleanse away all negativity from all layers of my energy field. How many people do that versus get into the shower and start thinking about the office, start thinking about problems in the office, start thinking about bills they don't have money to pay? That's what they're doing in the shower, which is a perfect opportunity to physically and metaphysically cleanse themselves. That's one part of setting the energy before you. So, here he was before Dr. Hugh Lin left to go, to the mental hospital. He would set his energy before him. He would meditate. He would clear his energy. He would maybe do energy work. Their idea of prana or chi was mana, and that is that life force energy. So he would do something like the Hawaiian traditional breath called the ha breath, where they would breathe in this particular way and they would draw in this life force energy, which comes from the sun. If you come out of body, you can easily see, if you look beyond, your expectations of what you're going to see out of body. If you say, "Show me reality beyond my projections," and you'll start to see things you couldn't have seen without making a statement like that, a powerful statement of clarity like that, of showing me, reality beyond what I can see with the eyes that have, been conditioned from yesterday and my entire life. You show me with fresh eyes, show me with my spiritual eyes. So he'd do this energy work before he goes to the hospital, to where he's in a balanced state when he gets there. He'd sit with those files. He would, instead of then judging, he would look at those files and he would connect himself. He would, then make a statement to the divinity. What did I do to cause this? You might be thinking, if you're a fly on the wall, you didn't do anything. What are you talking about, you crazy man? You didn't do anything. No, for him and his spiritual practice, his way of life is 100% responsibility. So he knew he was the grown-up in that space, because, 80% of the people in the building are criminally insane. The other 20% are, maybe out of that 20%, 80% of the employees, of the staff, don't even want to be there. They hate their jobs. They hate the abuse they get from the patients. They give abuse to the patients. So Dr. Hugh Lin is the grown-up in the room. He's the spiritual adult in the room. So in that mode of thinking, you give first. And you can apply this to everyday life. If you are at home with your partner, if you're at home with your family, if you are the one that is operating from a loving state, if you're the one operating from a state of compassion and forgiveness and kindness and mercy, where everybody else around you is just take, you're giving. And you're being asked by the universe to give first, because everybody around you can't give. They're in a state of survival. So that's what, same with the mental hospital. They were in a state of survival. Everybody in that space, including the staff. Dr. Hugh Lin was the only one that was operating from a space of divinity, of unlimited resources. And this is ultimately what I love about this spiritual teaching. It aligns with many other spiritual traditions where they're asking us to be the spiritual adult. And we become the spiritual adult through one step at a time by having mantras like, not perfection, it's progress, not perfection. These are the mantras I live by, and these are the things that I teach in my workshops. Progress, not perfection. It's one step at a time to get to this place to where maybe at this moment, all you can do is, okay, I can hear what this guy is saying. I don't know if I can implement everything, but I'll take one step at a time. That's all any spiritual tradition worth its weight is asking you to do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Wow. I'm just so struck by that sense of being the response-able adult, able to respond and to find freedom through that responsibility, actually. I guess that's what I'm hearing you say, that through the capacity to be in our heart's resonance and frequency, that we're able to give freely. And we can support others into that space as well, where they shift from survivalism, fear, and doubt into a space of trust, receiving, and then giving.
I think, you've probably experienced this, and I would imagine, a lot of your listeners have experienced this too, where we meet people that we don't know. We meet complete strangers, and with minutes, they're opening up to us. And they might even say something to you like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm even talking and sharing this with you. I wouldn't share this with even my best friend. Wow, they've just revealed two things. There's certain places in their minds where there's a lock where even their best friend doesn't get the key. And they're feeling safe around you, and they don't even know why.
Yeah.
All right. And this is, some people have that gift. Some people have that gift where people feel that you are a safe container. Mm-hmm. And this is another thing that I think is very important when we expect vulnerability from people. If we, like Brené Brown, she is a researcher into vulnerability and shame, and she talks about what she calls the vault. If somebody's being vulnerable and they're sharing very vulnerable things, it goes in that vault. And that conversation remains between the two of you. This is why ideas such as gossip and not being willing not to gossip is so important. Let's say you're at the office and the modern day watering hole is still the watering hole, but in the office it's the water cooler, or it's the kettle, where people are making their cups of tea. And, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 colleagues at a time sitting in there, and maybe another colleague is not there on that occasion, and they're all going into gossip mode about that colleague. And because something about that person makes them feel unsafe, even if it's just their ideas. I mean, hell, my grandmother was a Christian fundamentalist. She a lot of her ideas scared, frightened the hell out of me. But I can equally say that my spiritual, awareness at a young age frightened her, because they were different ideas. I did not believe that we were going to hell in a handbasket, that kind of stuff. So can you imagine somebody at the water cooler saying no, saying, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about this person behind their back. And let's say everybody at that water cooler knows you have more reason than anybody else there to dislike this person, okay? Because this person has stabbed you in the back a few times. What does that just now do? It demonstrates to everybody there that if I'm not willing to talk about somebody that I know has me in their sights, and the rest of you don't have me in your sights, and we actually get on really well and we like each other, if I'm not willing to talk about somebody who I know is gunning for me, what does that say to these other people? They're like, they can be guaranteed I'm never going to talk about them behind their backs. What does that do to the dynamic of the relationships of people, like, that those relationships? These people feel so incredibly safe. They start to get needs met with you that they've never got met with anybody else. And once you start meeting, their needs, such as their need for certainty that the things that they tell you goes in the vault. You're meeting their need for uncertainty, which is variety. You have a variety of conversation. You're always, have fresh ideas to share with them. They maybe have some problems, and you say to them up front, okay, am I hearing that, in this situation where you can just be very transparent, because you can get that way, where you just transparently know they just want an ear. They just want to vent in that moment, and you're just there to say, oh, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Oh, my God, did they do that? I'd punch them if they were here right now. They want that kind of vulnerability in return. They don't want you to fix it. But equally, if, you can turn around and say, okay, that's shit. What are you going to do about it? And if they then say to you, they give you point blank permission to jump in and start giving some advice, great. You know what? They're going to trust, because, they know how important you are to them, and you know how important you are to them. That is a huge game-changing dynamic. And this isn't even game-changing in the sense that you're doing this as an agenda. You have just come to the self-awareness of how important this is for all of us. All of us. The universe doesn't just want growth for you and me and your listeners. It wants growth and healing for everybody, including, the political leaders that we despise the most. The universe is not doing the judging. We are. And all of us share the same collective memories. So once we start to take responsibility for clearing those memories that everybody else is just repeating, everybody else is just unconsciously living their lives by, as we start to clear that energy, we start to clear a bigger and bigger space around us. Before you know it, your personal vortex becomes bigger and bigger, whether that's your heart field amplifying because you're now, your heart and your mind are perfectly aligned, and your energy field expands to the point. Can you imagine just walking into a room and it doesn't matter what you're wearing, what you look like, everybody takes notice because they feel it. They may not be able to put their finger on it, but they just know there's something about you. And again, they may not be able to put their finger on it because you are literally walking the talk. Yeah, you're literally going beyond, non-applied spirituality, where you just think, oh, like even in forgiveness work, oh, I know I should say sorry to this person, but you don't, because you're being held back by your own shadow, from your own past. You should say sorry, but something's holding you back, and that's the applied spirituality. Even if the applied spirituality in that moment is, I need to get help on my trauma here. I need to realize there's some complex trauma going on here from childhood that I can't fix on my own. And, how much longer am I going to wait? Because we either pay now or we pay later. Same with every area of our lives, even with food. We either pay now with higher quality food, or we buy it. We keep buying the poison that we know we're being fed by a system that doesn't have our backs.
Yeah. No. Thank you, Falcon. And yes, there's just so many things that I'm hearing, so many threads that you're interweaving into this conversation, and I'm aware that I can't pick them up in this particular time space, and perhaps we will in the dream space, but I'm aware of the time, and I'm aware you've got little boys that are needing your probably help to get them to sleep. I'm wondering if you've got just a few more minutes just to maybe talk about your synchronicity walks, or whether you feel that you have to get on now.
No, my wife actually has it managed. It's just, little kids will be little kids, and they will protest before bed. But she's got it, and she knows that I'm on a podcast, and we've planned ahead, so she's okay. So the synchronicity walks, they're very special to me because I can go into any city, and I can maybe put up a meetup somewhere, beforehand, or I can, on that day, I can just If I have a couple hours to kill, I can just while I'm on the train, maybe I just surreptitiously just leave a couple of leaflets on a chair as I get up, on the seat as I get up. Maybe I go into a coffee shop and I ask if I can post something on their notice board. And you don't know who's going to see something. Again, everything's connected. If somebody's meant to find something, if somebody's meant to see something, if somebody's meant to hear something, the universe will find a way.
Yeah.
Find a way. I mean, this is the whole purpose of these nudges that we experience, that we feel. Like, sometimes we see, 1111 flash up 10 times in a day in different ways. We're like, how's this happening? Why do I keep seeing this number? It's like a breadcrumb trail. And these non-physical forces, let's put more meat on the bones. Your guides, your soul family, your soul group, your buddies that have been in non-physical reality for eternity with you, your buddies that have gone into physical worlds and physical realities, same as you, lifetime after lifetime, forgetting who they really are, only to reemerge back into their holy glory again on the other side after transitioning death countless times. And many of them are now there watching after you. And you've been through the trenches of from the full spectrum human experience with them, full spectrum alien experiences with them on other worlds throughout the multidimensional universe. And they've got your back in ways you can't imagine, because they're operating from a level of unconditional love that you and me only get tastes of every now and again.
Yeah.
Only now and again. But those parts of us that remain in the other dimensions while we come here, they have a love for us, like I said, that we can't even fathom. And if you don't think that they're there laying down this breadcrumb trail, laying out all these gifts for you, they've got them stacked up. They're not experiencing spiritual poverty from their position. They're experiencing only spiritual abundance. And they're lining up the gifts for you. They're piling up the gifts. It's only us who feels the unworthiness. It doesn't stop them from loving us. It doesn't stop them from guiding us. So me knowing that, I know how synchronicity works. So if I decide I'm going to put leaflets out somewhere, I know that my guides are already communicating with other guides from people who can potentially see that and need to be nudged. That this person wasn't even going to have a coffee, and all of a sudden they just feel like, I need to have a coffee. And they go in and they're sipping their coffee and they see this notice board and they're drawn there for some reason. They're drawn there and they see this and they're like, holy shit, that's in a few hours from now. And they show up to a walk. They show up with another 20 people and they're all standing there. Maybe half of them came from notices on spiritual message boards, or people who know me, they want to come out for another walk, but there's half of them who've never met me before. They're curious, because this is one of the cheat codes as far as I'm concerned. This is one of the cheat codes for all dimensions of reality. What you could say, the sacred virtue of curiosity. All right. So these people were curious and they came, and they're now standing there with maybe a couple other veterans of the walk. And I show up, and somebody inadvertently will say something like, so what's the plan? And I then pull out these red Vegas style dice from my pocket. And I say, well, there is no plan. We surrender to these dice. The whole night we roll the dice. Every time we get to a street corner where there's more than one direction to go, we release the need to control. We release the need for any specific outcome. And we roll the dice. And the dice will then choose the direction for us. All right. So maybe they're just plain dice and I haven't modified them. They're just, 1 through 12. They're 2 dice of six facets each. And we might say, if we get to an intersection where there's 4 directions to go, we say, okay, if we roll 1 to 3, we go that way. If we roll 4 to 6, we go that way. If we roll 7 to 9, we go that way. If we roll 10 to 12, we go that way. Easy stuff. All right. And every now and again, we might see somebody, maybe we'll roll the dice and we roll like a 6. And then somebody walks by us, and on their shirt, it's a football jersey and it's the number 6. What do you think's going to happen? We're going to follow this person. We're going to follow this person for a few minutes. Maybe we'll roll the dice again to see, oh, it's number 3. Okay, we'll follow them for 3 minutes. We don't get in their face. We don't even let them know we're there. We're just allowing them to be our white rabbit, to take us deeper down the rabbit hole and literally take this walk completely out of our control. All right, because most of us are operating from a level of fake control. Maybe somebody's hurt us and we say something like, I'm never going to get in a relationship again. That's fake control. That's not real control. That's like saying, oh my God, you heard the weather report, you knew it was going to rain, and you went outside without your umbrella, and you get drenched, and you're saying, I'm never going to leave the house again when there's gray clouds. That's fake control. Real control is realizing that there are so many things outside of your control, but you look for the areas that are under your control. If you know the weather's going to be bad, you take a raincoat. You prepare for it, and then you can't cover your eyes, when it starts to rain and say, no, it's not raining, or the sun's not shining, when in reality you're covering your eyes. That's denial. So people come to these synchronicity walks, and it's a lesson in letting go. And not everybody can do it. We have this phenomenon on synchronicity walks where people fall through the cracks. Maybe, they've had their buttons pushed 2 or 3 times during the body of the walk. And then I look back and I see them running down the street, to run away. And I just wave to them, see you in the next lifetime. They've taken themselves too serious, because where they had that growth test handed to them 2 or 3 times, it just got too much. It was way outside their comfort zone, so they ran away. That does happen. But those who are left standing and walking, we experience magic. We experience an elevated level of spiritual reality, a reality where we experience the flow state, where everything is effortless. Everything is just easy. Everything is like the consciousness of water, where we're not resisting. We're literally like the water that's flowing downhill. We encounter a rock, right? We go over it, we go around it. Eventually we go through it or under it. We're like the consciousness of water on these walks. It's non-resistance. And magic absolutely unfolds when that happens, to the point to where I'll give you one example of the magic. So at the very beginning of the walk, we roll the dice to get our group number. And let's say it's number 4. So throughout the walk, we now look for the number 4 as we're being guided by the dice. If we get to an intersection, and just before we roll the dice, if a number 4 bus goes by, we follow in the direction of where the bus is going. Now, on this one particular occasion, we rolled the number 4 as our group number. We followed it like a supernatural breadcrumb trail, and magic was unfolding. We got to this bus stop, and we didn't even look at the number of the bus stop. We were talking about crossing the road, and there were 2 alleys on the other side. So I said, okay, well, let's roll the dice to see which alley we go. And we rolled the dice, and it was the number 4. So we got our number again. And then somebody noticed we were standing under the number 4 bus stop. And we're like, oh, well, great. So the moment somebody said that, I said, okay, well, how about this? If that bus, number 4 bus, comes around the corner within like a minute of me saying this, then we get on the bus. And there was this air of like, oh, shit. We don't know, where that bus is going to go. We don't know how many stops we're going to go. But the moment I said that, we didn't have to wait a minute. The bus literally came around the corner. Now, everybody was literally they were very present in the moment. And they were like the honey badger with its nose stuffed in the hornet's nest, getting the honey, in the bee's nest, getting the honey. Honey badger doesn't care. You're highly present by this point. At least I was, because I was in the zone. I was in the zone for aha moments. I was in the zone of synchronicity itself, which is like a 7 to 8 hertz theta frequency, where we're out of our thinking mind and we're in our hearts. Yeah. We're operating from our hearts, and this is literally our guide now. And so the bus pulls up. Everybody gets out their Oyster cards, because we were in London doing this walk. And we get in, we tap in. The moment everybody's on the bus, it starts pouring with rain. I mean, it was torrential. And all of us were like, oh my God, thank goodness we trusted to get on the bus. Mm-hmm. And as somebody said that, I thought to myself, my mind just went to a parallel dimension, a parallel earth, where we didn't trust, where we took ourselves seriously. And now the trickster god of synchronicity brings and opens up the heavens, and we're now drenched because we took ourselves too seriously and didn't laugh.
Yeah.
All right. So we're on the bus, we're high and dry. And I say to everybody, okay, now we're going to roll the dice again to see how many stops we go. And you could feel the tension in the air. I don't know where this bus is going to go. And one person said, low number, I roll it. No, actually, I let somebody else roll it because I always let other people roll it because I don't want them accusing me of being like a Darren Brown pulling stunts, choreographing stuff. So it's out of my hands, literally. So somebody rolled the dice and they rolled the number 9. And we're like, oh, shit, we're going 9 stops. And everybody around me is going, oh, shit. I'm going, oh, yeah. And deeper down the rabbit hole, more and more out of our control, more and more out of our comfort zone. This is where the learning happens. This is where everything outside of everything we want in life that's currently outside of our comfort zone, it's where it exists. It's where it's at. If we everything we wanted and needed was in our life, it was because we opened ourselves to it. It wasn't because we stayed in a comfort zone, stayed in the fear mind. It was because we opened ourselves to life. All right. Yeah. So we roll the 9, we go 9 stops. As we're getting off the bus, and I kid you not, I couldn't have, obviously I had no control of the weather. The whole time we were on the whole 9 stops, it was pouring with rain. The moment we stepped off the bus, it stopped raining. You could not have better timed it. It was perfection. So people now commenting on that, their minds are being blown. They're like, I can't believe this. Their fears are just being grounded away from them. The doubt is ebbing away because we've now had these back-to-back synchronicities. We turn around and on the wall of this brick wall next to the pavement, it read, wait here for further instructions. Everybody just cracked up. We couldn't believe it. It was like synchronicity was stalking us. All right. So we waited. I said to everybody, we wait. And we didn't have to wait long. Maybe we waited 20 seconds. This black cab drives up. So this is, the black cab is the color of the cab, that is predominantly in London. It's a historical vehicle, and it's painted black. And he rolled up. His passenger got out. He looked at us. And I pointed at the sign and he just chuckled. The cab driver chuckled. And I said, look, we're not tourists. We don't need to be anywhere in particular. We have nowhere we need to go. We're not trying to get to Buckingham Palace. We're rolling dice and getting lost down the rabbit hole. Can you just randomly, intuitively pick a direction for us? And he literally just took his hand and he pointed in a direction behind the taxi. So, downward of where he was driving. We thanked him and we started walking. We walked maybe about a minute and a half. And on the right-hand side of where we were walking on the sidewalk was a block of flats, so a block of an apartment building. And the penthouse apartment was this booming music. We knew it was a party going on. We thought, why don't we roll the dice to see if the dice says gate crash this party, yes or no? And again, you could feel the conditioned tension going on because people are like, there's these social norms. There's this social contract. You don't just knock on somebody's door and gate crash their party. Well, synchronicity doesn't play by mortal rules in my books. All right. It doesn't play by our fears. It's like when we talk about the universe or God, oh, God's on my side. No, there's only one side, and that's God's side. So you're either on God's side or, you're operating from a level of fear. You're operating from a level of hate. You're operating from a level of mistrust. So there's only one side. All right. And that's reality. And then you have, which is love. And then you have the illusion, which is the stuff that's not real. Our fear is not as real as telepathy. Our fears are not as real as our precognitive dreams. Mm-hmm. Our fears are not real. Our gut instincts are real. So my instinct was, we gate crash this party. And the moment I said this to people, this guy comes out of a pub, this bar from across the road on the other side of the road. He crosses the street and looks at us because he could see the intent. And he was like, what are you guys up to? And I said, we're about to gate crash this party. He goes, oh my God, this is crazy. My mates, my friends just challenged me, bet me I wouldn't gate crash that party. And so if we would have been 20 seconds earlier, 10 seconds earlier, 10 seconds later, we wouldn't have bumped into this guy. That's a synchronicity in itself. That's a sign. That's a nudge. That's reality saying, trust your instincts. So we didn't even need the dice. That was our confirmation. All right. So I said, okay, fine. Everybody follow me. We went up to the block of flats, the apartment building, and I just went, I rang all the bells, I pressed all the buzzers. And sure enough, somebody let us in. Somebody just wasn't on their game, or maybe they were, just the universe inspired them. They just didn't care. They buzzed us in. So here was about 20 of us in the group, plus this guy that came from the pub. We walk up all the flights of stairs. We get to the penthouse. I knock on the door. You can already smell it. There's the smell of marijuana in the air. The guy opens this door, and it's like a chimichang film where, you open the door, all this smoke comes out, this aroma of marijuana, and he's got this spliff in his hand. He's like, yeah, can I help you? There's like 20 of us standing there. And I go into this brief explanation, synchronicity, dice, nudged, all this stuff. I just explained to him within an elevator speech of what happened that night within 20 seconds. And then I go silent, because at that point you have to literally, it's almost like, we were playing tennis, the ball's in his court now. So I have to stop talking. I didn't get in my own way. And he's just there, even with the awkward silence. For everybody else in the group, it was awkward silence. For me, it was a sacred pause.
Yeah.
And the guy, he's happy in that pause with me. And he's just looking me up and down, takes another drag on his joint, and he says, well, come on in. And we all pile into this party, and we have a great night. And it was this kind of stuff you just can't make up. But this kind of stuff most people don't experience, because to them, synchronicity isn't an everyday experience, because they don't have that trust in the universe to show up. They go to bed at night and they pray like, universe, show me a sign. And we know inevitably it's like it's like one of these things like people talk about, oh yeah, okay, there's the sign. Okay, show me another sign, that doubt. And where they get tripped up by the doubt, whereas the doubt is their closed door. For me, I know it's a growth opportunity. All right. So again, I use the doubt as an opportunity to look back. Okay, look at my experiences in the past on these synchronicity walks. How many times, 9 out of 10, was I right to follow my gut instinct? 9 out of 10 times easily. All right. So I look back at that, and I look at the doubt in the face again, and I say, thank you. Thank you for helping me look back and remember how far I've come. To where before I would have seen this, as a fear to say, nope, this is not my opportunity. This is not my time. And then the ego uses our own teachings against us. Oh, it's divine timing. You're not meant to knock on this guy's door. Maybe another time in another lifetime. That's the ego co-opting spiritual teachings for its own benefit, to keep us feeling small and disconnected.
Yeah. Gosh, Falcon, I have to say, I've been grinning like a Cheshire cat as you've taken us on that synchronicity walk with you. It just sounds like living the dream, actually, and I can't wait for you to help co-create a synchronicity walk up here in Scotland. I'm looking forward to when that comes.
Oh, it'll happen, Caroline.
But I'm just so moved by the magic of this work, of all the sacred practices that you're putting out into the world and supporting people to wake up and to follow that white rabbit and await further instructions and really tune into the ever presence of synchronicity. And yeah, gosh, there's just so much I could say, and I don't even have half the words that I need to be able to acknowledge how phenomenal this conversation has been. And in all honesty, I think I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. But sadly, we do live in a linear time space, and we've gone over a little bit. And I'm so grateful for your generosity and that extra time. But it's just been an absolute joy and delight to hear from you and to journey with you this last 90 minutes, Falcon. Just so appreciated. And perhaps you might come back another time so we can talk about some of the many other things that we could have spoken about, but the dice just didn't roll that way this evening.
Great metaphor. Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I now run 9-day workshops. Like I said, I just don't have enough time in 90 minutes to say everything I want to say, or say the things that people need to hear. Yeah. And this is one of the other things, I'll close on this. I think this is another important one for people. it was also on that wound that spiritual healers and teachers have sometimes, where they think, what right do I have to charge for this gift? The universe doesn't expect you to work for free. And, money means food on the table, means clothes on your back and a roof over your head. It's learning to get over the wound and then operate from a place of fair exchange, of fair value. And if you know in your heart that you're giving more than you're receiving, then, not only does the universe keep a perfect set of books in that sense, it's going to give you even more than what other people have given you. But that doesn't mean undercut yourself. That's not what I'm saying at all. But on the flip side, people sometimes who see the price of a workshop, they see the price the healer wants to charge to do some healing work, or even for a psychic reading. Just because you can't afford something doesn't mean you're, being ripped off. Doesn't mean you're being taken advantage of, because there are levels to life. There is levels to abundance. There is levels to the law of attraction. There's levels to manifestation. Just because you're at a place where you can't afford something doesn't mean you're being ripped off. Mm-hmm. All right. This is important for people to see from multiple perspectives, because I had somebody recently who wanted to join one of my workshops, and they're like, oh, that seems like more than it was even the last year. Well, cost of living's gone up for everybody, even for the venue, even if I have a chef, at a 9-day retreat, everybody's cost of living has gone up. And it's just like, well, just because you can't afford it now doesn't mean, again, that, I'm trying to take advantage of you. We have to look at our collective wounds. We have to see the opportunities from where we're at. And we have to learn to fill the space we're currently in order for the universe to create a bigger space for us to flow into. This is one of my favorite concepts in life in general. Fill the space you're in. Love everything in that space. Forgive everything in that space. Treat everything as sacred in that space. That includes the people, that includes your bedroom, that includes your job, that includes the colleagues, that includes people on the street, that includes everything. Fill the space you're in. And when you fill that space, the universe will do the next natural thing, because it keeps a perfect set of books. It's self-correcting, it's self-adjusting. It will create a bigger space for you to flow in naturally. It's how the universe works.
Beautiful. Thank you, Falcon. Thank you to everybody who's joined us in this present moment, and for your future listeners. But feeling my cup is full and overflowing with abundance and medicine. I just wish everybody sweet lucid dreams when they come, and thank you for joining us, Falcon, for just the most epic journey of a conversation, and I look forward to future conversations with you. But much love. I shall end the recording, and looking forward to when we catch up again. So thank you,
Caroline. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Take good care. Bye-bye now.
You too. Bye-bye.